Have you ever had a moment where everything collapsed at once? Not a small inconvenience, not a minor setback, a real collapse. The kind where you wake up one morning and the life you had planned is simply gone. Maybe it was a relationship that ended without warning. Maybe it was a failure so public that you could not hide from it. Maybe it was your body breaking down, your finances falling apart, or a betrayal from someone you trusted completely. And in that moment, most people do one of two things. They either run from the pain as fast as they can, they distract themselves, numb themselves, pretend it did not happen, stay busy enough that they never have to sit with what broke them, or they collapse under it. They let the pain define them. They build their entire identity around the wound. They become someone who was broken, and they never fully leave that place. But there is a third option, and most people never find it because it requires something uncomfortable. It requires you to stay, to sit inside the pain without escaping it, to look at it clearly, understand it fully, and then use it. Not as a weapon against yourself, not as proof that life is unfair, but as raw material, as fuel, as the pressure that forges something harder than what existed before. That process has a name. It is called discipline. And when pain becomes discipline, something remarkable happens. You stop being someone who simply survived. You become someone who cannot be broken again. This video shows you exactly how that transformation works. Not through motivation, not through temporary inspiration that fades and fades in 3 days, but through understanding the psychology of pain, the mechanics of discipline, and the specific habits that turn suffering into strength. Before we go further, drop this in the comments. My pain is not my ending. It is my beginning. 1. What pain actually does to a person. Most people misunderstand pain completely. They treat it as a sign that something is wrong, as evidence that life has turned against them, as something to be eliminated as quickly as possible. But pain is not a punishment. It is information. It is the most honest feedback you will ever receive, because pain does not lie. It does not soften the message to protect your feelings. It does not tell you what you want to hear. It tells you exactly where the gap is, between who you are and who you need to become, between the life you have built and the life that is actually sustainable. Think about physical pain for a moment. When your body sends pain signals, it is not trying to torture you. It is protecting you. It is saying this area is damaged. Pay attention here. Something needs to change. Without pain signals, people with certain nerve conditions cannot feel when they are burning their skin or breaking their bones. The absence of pain does not make them free. It makes them vulnerable in ways they cannot even detect. Emotional and psychological pain works exactly the same way. The loneliness you feel after isolation tells you something about your need for genuine connection. The shame that follows failure tells you something about where you placed your identity. The rage that comes from betrayal tells you something about where your trust was given without enough wisdom. The grief that follows loss tells you something about what truly mattered to you all along. But here's what people do instead of listening to pain. They mute it. They scroll through screens for hours until their mind goes quiet. They drink. They stay constantly busy so the silence never arrives. They talk endlessly about the pain without ever actually moving through it. They perform healing for public audiences online without ever sitting alone long enough to actually heal. And the pain waits. That is the strange thing about unprocessed pain. It does not disappear just because you refuse to acknowledge it. It goes underground. It starts shaping your behavior in ways you do not consciously understand. You become reactive in certain situations and you do not know why. You feel inexplicable anxiety in specific environments. You avoid things that never used to frighten you. You push people away without understanding the mechanism that is driving the distance. Unprocessed pain becomes unconscious behavior, and unconscious behavior controls your life without your permission. There is a man in ancient history whose name became synonymous with strategic thinking. He was exiled, imprisoned, watched everything he built collapse around him more than once. He did not call this suffering, he called it education. He wrote that one of the most dangerous things a person can do is live a comfortable life in which nothing ever truly tests them, because comfort does not reveal character. Pressure does, and he was right. You will never know what you are made of during easy seasons. You only discover your actual capacity when the easy options disappear and the only path forward requires you to become someone you have never been before. Pain, then, is not your enemy. It is your most accurate mirror. The question is whether you are willing to look. Drop this in the comments. I am willing to look at what pain is trying to show me. 2. The moment pain either destroys you or builds you. There is a specific moment that determines everything. It happens after the initial shock of pain has passed, the numbness fades, the adrenaline settles, and you are left sitting with the reality of what happened. This is the crossroads, and most people do not even realize it exists because they are too busy reacting. At this crossroads, two voices emerge. The first voice speaks from wounds. It says, "This proves something terrible about you. You were not enough. You never will be. The world is unfair and you are its victim. Look at what has been taken from you. Look at how you have been wronged. You deserve to be angry. You deserve to stop trying. You deserve to give up." This voice is not evil. It is afraid. It is a defense mechanism trying to protect you from future pain by convincing you not to risk anything again. But if you listen to it, it does not protect you. It imprisons you. The second voice is quieter. It does not compete with the first voice. It simply waits until the screaming exhausts itself. Then it says something different. It says, "This happened. Now what are you going to do about it?" That second voice is discipline being born. Discipline is not the absence of emotion. That's a common misunderstanding. People think disciplined people feel nothing, like that they are cold machines moving through life without feeling the weight of it. That is not true. Disciplined people feel everything. They feel the pain as sharply as anyone, but they do not let the pain make decisions for them. The difference is not feeling less. The difference is waiting. Waiting long enough after the pain arrives before making permanent decisions based on temporary emotional states. Waiting long enough to separate what the pain is telling them from what the pain wants them to do. Because those two things are completely different. The pain of rejection tells you something real about the relationship, the situation, or sometimes about yourself. But the emotional response to that pain tells you nothing useful. It just wants revenge or escape. And acting from revenge or escape never builds anything worth having. Think about two people who experience the same devastating failure. A business collapses. Both of them lose everything. Same situation, same amount of damage. The first person decides this is proof that they were never meant to succeed. They spend years bitter, resentful, telling the story of their failure at every opportunity, slowly becoming someone defined entirely by what went wrong. 5 years later, nothing has changed except that the story has grown more elaborate. The second person spends 3 months in genuine pain. They do not pretend it is fine. They allow themselves to grieve what was lost. But during those 3 months, they also begin analyzing. What did they miss? What decisions led here? What did they not understand about the market, about people, about themselves? They sit with the information the pain is carrying, and then they begin building again, but differently, with knowledge they could not have gained any other way. 5 years later, the second person is unrecognizable, not because they were naturally stronger, but because they chose differently at the crossroads. Nobody teaches you this choice exists. That is the problem. Society teaches you either to suppress pain quickly and perform strength, or to process pain indefinitely and perform vulnerability. Both of those are performances. Neither of them is transformation. Transformation happens when you stop performing and start converting. When pain stops being a story you tell and starts being a curriculum you study. 3. How discipline is actually built. The psychology nobody talks about. Here is something most people get completely wrong about discipline. They think it is about willpower. They imagine disciplined people as individuals with some supernatural reservoir of motivation that never runs dry. They think if they could just want it badly enough, discipline would appear. Willpower is not discipline. Willpower is temporary. It runs on emotion and energy, and both of those fluctuate constantly. You cannot build a life on something that disappears when you are tired, hungry, stressed, or grieving. Real discipline is built on something completely different. It is built on identity. When pain is deep enough, it has the power to destroy the old identity completely. The version of you that existed before the loss, before the failure, before the betrayal, That version is gone. This is devastating when it happens. But it is also, if you understand what it means, the greatest opportunity you will ever be given. Because when an identity is destroyed, a new one must be constructed. And the question is whether you construct it consciously or allow it to be constructed by default. Most people construct their new identity by default. The pain defines them. Victim becomes their identity. Survivor becomes their identity. The person who was wronged becomes their permanent social role. And there is comfort in those identities because they come with a built-in explanation for everything that has gone wrong and a permanent excuse for everything that has not yet been built. But constructing identity consciously means asking a different question after pain. Not, why did this happen to me? But who do I need to become so that nothing like this can destroy me again? That question changes everything because it is forward-facing. It accepts what happened without dwelling in it. It takes the information the pain contains and converts it into a blueprint for a different person. And then discipline becomes the process of constructing that person, not through grand gestures and dramatic transformations, through small, consistent daily actions that no one else sees. There is a specific psychological mechanism at work here that is worth understanding. When you experience genuine pain and then choose action over paralysis, something happens in the brain. The connection between discomfort and response begins to rewire. Discomfort, which once triggered avoidance, begins to trigger engagement. Pain, which once signaled danger, begins to signal opportunity. This is not theoretical. Athletes know it. Surgeons know it. Anyone who has pushed through genuine suffering to achieve something real knows it. There comes a point where the thing that used to break you becomes the thing that sharpens you, where difficulty is no longer something to fear, but something to seek, because you have learned what difficulty produces. But this rewiring does not happen through inspiration. It does not happen from watching motivational content or reading quotes about resilience. It happens through repetition, specifically through the repetition of choosing action when every part of you wants to stop. Every time you do that, every single time you feel the weight of your situation and move forward anyway, you are not just completing a task. You are writing a new story about who you are. You are teaching your own nervous system that you are someone who does not stop. And over time, that becomes identity. And when it becomes identity, discipline stops requiring effort. It simply becomes how you exist in the world. Drop this in the comments. I am becoming someone who does not stop. 4. The 5 disciplines that pain unlocks. There are specific disciplines that only become possible after genuine suffering. These are not disciplines you can build during comfortable seasons. Comfort does not create the conditions for them. But pain, if you use it correctly, unlocks exactly the internal capacity required for each one. The first discipline is emotional regulation. Before serious pain, most people's emotional regulation is untested. They think they are calm because they have never been truly provoked. They think they are patient because they have never been genuinely pushed. Then pain arrives, real, lasting, unavoidable pain, and they discover exactly how thin that regulation was. People who go through deep suffering and choose to stay present with it rather than escaping or collapsing develop something extraordinary. They develop the ability to feel without being controlled by feeling, to be in discomfort without needing to immediately eliminate it, to sit with uncertainty without being destroyed by it. This capacity is rare, and it cannot be purchased, faked, or shortcut. It is built only through the experience of staying present inside pain long enough that you discover the pain does not kill you, that you can contain it, that you are larger than it. People who have this discipline become extraordinarily difficult to manipulate, destabilize, or defeat, because you cannot control someone through emotional pressure if they have already learned to sit with pressure without flinching. The second discipline is radical honesty with yourself. One of the quieter gifts of pain is that it strips away illusion. When life is comfortable, human beings are extraordinarily skilled at maintaining comfortable lies about their relationships, about their work, about the direction they are heading, about who they actually are versus who they imagine themselves to be. Pain removes the luxury of comfortable lies. Suddenly you are forced to look clearly at what is real. And people who have gone through this process, who have been stripped down to the truth about themselves, and who did not look away from what they saw, develop the capacity for a kind of honesty that most people are incapable of. They stop rationalizing. They stop defending positions out of pride when the evidence against those positions is clear. They stop pretending relationships are healthy when the behavior in those relationships tells a different story. This honesty is not cruelty. It is clarity. And clarity over time produces better decisions than almost any other quality. The third discipline is strategic patience. Pain teaches you, if you let it, that most things worth having cannot be obtained quickly. This is a lesson that comfortable seasons rarely deliver with enough force to actually land. When you have suffered genuinely, when you have spent months or years rebuilding something that was destroyed, you develop a relationship with time that changes everything. You stop expecting immediate results. You stop abandoning efforts that do not produce instant gratification. You understand at a cellular level that some things simply require sustained investment across long periods of time. This patience becomes a competitive advantage in almost every domain of life, because the world is full of people who quit when results are not immediate. The person who understands how to wait, who knows how to continue working without visible reward, becomes nearly unstoppable simply by remaining in the game long enough for compounding to work. The fourth discipline is focused attention. Suffering clarifies priorities with brutal efficiency. Before pain, people spread their attention across 100 things. They worry about social comparisons. They spend energy on drama, on gossip, on maintaining the appearance of a life, rather than building an actual one. Pain ends that. When you are genuinely suffering, the irrelevant falls away completely. You stop caring about what people think of you online. You stop investing emotional energy in conflicts that mean nothing. You stop pretending that the small things matter when you are confronted with what actually matters. And the people who carry this lesson forward after the pain passes develop the ability to maintain that focus even when life becomes easier again. They have been trained by experience to recognize what deserves their attention and what does not, and they guard that attention accordingly, not as a philosophical exercise, but as an instinct built through suffering. The fifth discipline is the ability to act under uncertainty. Before you have been through something genuinely difficult, uncertainty is paralyzing. You wait for conditions to be perfect before starting. You wait for guarantees that do not exist. You wait for permission from circumstances that will never be favorable enough. But pain teaches you that the perfect conditions you are waiting for do not come, that you have to move forward without guarantees because the alternative is standing still forever. And people who have learned to act under the worst conditions develop an extraordinary capacity to act under any conditions. They are not reckless. They are not impulsive. They have simply been trained by reality to understand that motion through uncertainty is possible, that you can take the next step without seeing the full staircase, and that the staircase only reveals itself to the people who are actually moving. 5. The daily architecture of an unbeatable mind. Understanding the psychology is necessary, but psychology without daily structure is incomplete. The mind that pain has forged must be maintained, and maintenance happens in the ordinary hours of ordinary days. Here's what unbeatable people actually do differently, not in dramatic moments, but in the quiet architecture of daily life. The first practice is solitude by design, not by accident. Most people experience solitude only when it is forced on them. Unbeatable people create it deliberately, not to escape from life, but to maintain clarity about it. Because the world is extraordinarily loud. There are opinions arriving constantly, demands arriving constantly, comparisons arriving constantly. Without intentional silence, your mind never gets to hear itself think. Even 30 minutes of genuine solitude each day, without a phone, without input, without stimulation, changes the quality of your thinking over time. Decisions become clearer. Priorities become more obvious. The noise that other people inject into your mental space gets processed and released instead of hardening into anxiety. People who have been through real pain often discover this practice accidentally, because when suffering is deep enough, you stop seeking external stimulation. You have no energy for it. And in that forced quiet, Many of them encounter the most important realizations of their lives. The practice is simply to continue that quiet intentionally after the pain has passed. The second practice is keeping commitments to yourself with the same seriousness you give to commitments to others. This is where most people fail the discipline test without even realizing it. They keep their promises to employers. They keep their promises to friends. They show up for appointments with other people without question. But the commitments they make to themselves, the workout they planned, the work they scheduled, the rest they decided they needed, those disappear the moment anything else competes for the time. This pattern tells your own nervous system something you do not realize it is hearing. It tells you that your commitments to yourself do not matter, that you are the lowest priority. And over time, that message erodes the foundation of self-trust the discipline requires. Unbeatable people are ruthlessly consistent about commitments to themselves, not because they are perfect, but because they understand that every kept commitment builds evidence for who they are. Every broken commitment builds evidence against it, and eventually you become what the evidence says you are. The third practice is eliminating optional suffering. There is suffering that builds you. The discomfort of disciplined work, the difficulty of honest conversations, the pain of growing beyond what you used to be. This kind of suffering has value and should be embraced, but there is also optional suffering. The suffering that comes from consuming content designed to make you angry. The suffering that comes from rehearsing arguments in your mind with people who are not present. The suffering that comes from comparing your progress to the curated highlights of other people's lives. The suffering that comes from spending time with individuals who drain your energy without contributing anything in return. Unbeatable people become aggressively protective about eliminating optional suffering, not out of avoidance, but out of economics. Energy is finite. Attention is finite. The energy spent on optional suffering is energy unavailable for the work that actually matters. And they understand this not as philosophy, but as lived experience, because they have already paid the cost of suffering that produces nothing. The fourth practice is measuring differently than the world measures. The world measures success through outcomes, the visible results, the numbers, the external signals of achievement, and outcomes matter eventually. But outcomes are often slow and uncertain and dependent on factors outside your control. Unbeatable people measure through a different lens. They measure whether they did what they said they would do, whether they showed up when it was difficult, whether they kept the commitment when every reason to abandon it was available, whether they moved forward when stillness would have been easier. This is the measurement that builds identity, because you control this measurement completely. The outcome of your effort is partially determined by factors you cannot govern. But the quality of your effort, the consistency of your presence, the integrity of your commitment, that belongs entirely to you. And people who measure by the quality of their effort rather than only by the outcome develop a resilience that external measurement can never produce. Because outcomes fluctuate, markets change, circumstances shift. But if you're someone who gave their full effort consistently, no result can take that away from you. 6. The difference between someone who survived pain and someone who used it. Many people survive difficult periods. Far fewer use them. Survival is getting to the other side of pain. It is finding a way to continue existing after the thing that tried to stop you. Survival is not nothing. It takes real strength. But survival alone does not make you unbeatable. It simply means you are not broken yet. Using pain is different. It is the active decision to extract every lesson the pain contains and convert those lessons into permanent capability. It is going back through the experience, not to relive it emotionally, but to understand analytically, to examine what was happening, what you missed, what you contributed to the situation that you did not see clearly at the time, and what you now understand that you did not before. This requires a specific kind of intellectual courage. Because honest analysis of painful experiences often reveals uncomfortable things. It often reveals that you played a role you did not want to acknowledge, that you saw warning signs you chose to ignore, that you held beliefs that were not serving you without realizing it. that the story you told about the situation was missing important information. The temptation is to construct a narrative where you are simply the victim of forces outside your control. Sometimes that narrative is accurate. Sometimes people genuinely experience pain that is entirely the result of others' actions or random circumstances. But even in those cases, the analysis worth doing is not about who caused the pain. It is about who you want to be in response to it. People who use their pain rather than simply surviving it develop what can only be described as a form of wisdom that cannot be taught in comfortable conditions. They understand human nature more deeply because they have experienced the depths of their own. They recognize manipulation more quickly because they have felt it clearly. They build better relationships because they understand what makes relationships fail. They make better decisions because they carry the memory of what poor decisions cost. And something else happens when you genuinely use your pain rather than carrying it unchanged. You stop being afraid of suffering. This is perhaps the most powerful transformation that occurs, because most of human behavior, the avoidance, the procrastination, the small compromises, the decisions to stay safe when risk was required, most of it is driven by fear of pain. Fear of failure, which is painful. Fear of rejection, which is painful. Fear of loss, which is painful. But when you have gone through genuine pain and discovered what it actually produced in you, the fear loses its control. Not because pain stops hurting, it still hurts, but because you now have evidence of what pain produces in you when you move through it correctly. And that evidence is more powerful than the fear. You know what happens after the fall. You know what exists on the other side of the suffering. You have been there before. And that knowledge changes the entire calculation. Risks that used to be paralyzing become possible. Challenges that used to feel like threats become interesting. Because somewhere in you, you know you have already survived worse. And you know that what looked like destruction from the inside was actually construction. That is what makes a person unbeatable. Not the absence of pain, not immunity to suffering, but the deep experiential knowledge that suffering cannot stop you. That you are someone who gets up. That the version of you on the other side of difficulty is always more capable than the version that went in. Drop this in the comments. I have been through worse. I am still here. I am stronger for it. Closing. The person you are becoming. Let us come back to where we started. You have experienced pain. Maybe you are in it right now. Maybe the wound is recent enough that it is still raw, still unclear, still too close to understand what it means. Or maybe it is further back, something you survived years ago but never fully converted into the strength it was capable of producing. Either way, the question is the same. What are you doing with it? Because pain is not neutral. It does not simply pass through you and leave you unchanged. It changes you in one of two directions. It either makes you smaller, more afraid, more defended, more closed, more convinced that the world is dangerous and you are not enough to navigate it, or it makes you larger, more capable, more clear, more honest, more patient, more difficult to break. The difference between those two directions is discipline. Discipline that begins with a single decision made in a single moment to use what happened to you rather than be used by it. That decision does not have to be grand. It does not require a dramatic announcement or a public transformation. It can be quiet. It can be the decision made alone without an audience to get up one more time, to do the work one more day, to keep the commitment you made to yourself even when the motivation has entirely disappeared. Those small private decisions accumulate. Over days, they become habits. Over months, they become character. Over years, they become the kind of person who other people look at and describe as strong, as resilient, as unshakable, without understanding that what they are witnessing was forged in private pain that was never wasted. The world needs people who have been through something and did not break, who learned what pain has to teach and then carried that wisdom forward, who became more capable through difficulty instead of more defended, who stopped performing strength and started embodying it. That person is built through the decision you make about your pain, not the pain itself, the decision. If this video reached something in you, if you recognized yourself somewhere in what was said, then do not let this be something you simply watched and moved past. Take a moment and ask honestly, Where is my pain still unprocessed? Where has it been driving my behavior without my awareness? And what would it mean to finally use it? Share this with someone who's in a difficult season right now and needs to hear that what they are going through is not the end of their story. Subscribe so you do not miss what comes next. And before you leave, drop this in the comments. When pain meets discipline, I become unbeatable.